Our 1 o'clock session is entitled Everyday Research in the Internet Age, and our speaker is Dr. Laura Gurak, Professor and Founding Chair of the Department of Writing Studies at the University of Minnesota. Laura holds an MS in Technical Communication and a doctorate in Communication and Rhetoric from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. She's author of 2 books from Yale University Press, one of which was the first book-length work to study online social actions. She has co-edited several collections in technical communication and authored numerous conference presentations and papers. She is a recipient of the Society for Technical Communications Outstanding Article Award, as well as a College Distinguished Teaching Award. Laura has authored or co-authored 5 textbooks in technical communication, published with Pearson, and has worked as a technical writer and communications consultant for various companies and organizations. In this presentation, she looks at how everyday research activities can be used to teach more general lessons about formal classroom and workplace research. She will review the topic, discuss the practical implications, and look at a classroom activity designed to engage students in an analytic, hands-on activity and discussion about online research strategies. Laura, are you ready to begin?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, this is Laura.
Hi, thanks for being with us.
All right. I'm just going to do a few things here on Show My Screen. It'll take a second.
All right.
So can you see my screen now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and is it in the display mode where you're just seeing one slide?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so I think we're ready to go.
Great.
I have to apologize in advance. I just returned from some travel and I have a cold, so excuse me if I have to take short breaks to clear my throat. I'll do that by muting my mic. I just want to test that now. Okay, no one heard that, so I think I have a solution for that. So if
I think you're good.
I'm going to mute my mic and just do that real quick. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar. This is a topic that I think is really interesting no matter what kind of writing course you're teaching. Actually any kind of college course these days, because the era of library-only research has really been over for a long time, and in particular now everybody's using the internet for all kinds of research, and it's sort of the go-to place. So this presentation, this webinar, is designed to get us to think a little bit about how to engage students and ourselves where we already live, which is to say engage us in the kinds of research we do every day on sort of what you might consider mundane topics, and then examine those research strategies and use them to think about more formal kinds of research. So, well, what is everyday research? I think it's not hard. It's not hard for us to think about everything you've Googled from the time you got up this morning until now and start to think about that in research terms. Just about any topic that we can think about is suddenly becomes the subject of research if we think about research in a really broad way. I've just listed a few items here. For instance, you go to the doctor, they suggest a new prescription for you to try, and next thing you know, you're home researching that. You see a financial issue on the news, you have to buy a new car, you have to fix some plumbing around your house, or you just happen to notice when you go out at night there's this one particular star in the sky and you're sort of wondering, what is that star? Is that a planet or a star? And so people generally go online and look these things up, and I think it's really interesting to think about our behaviors in those situations, the practices we engage in, and the kind of tacit assumptions we make about what web pages or what information is valid or isn't, and then use that as a starting point to talk with students about doing research for more formal kinds of activities. So some of you may know, and if you don't, this is actually a great resource for students. Sometimes I use this on a first day of class kind of activity, the Pew Internet and American Life Project. They have all kinds of studies on just about anything related to the internet, and this one is rather recent and seemed interesting for this topic. They did a study on how teens do research today in the digital world, and they interviewed teachers from AP writing teachers as well as teachers from the National Writing Project Summer Institute, and asked them about their students' research behaviors. It's quite interesting actually, because the teens are going to become our next generation of college students. So they found 76% of the teachers who were surveyed for this study said that pretty much students now come to college conditioned to expect to be able to find information both quickly and easily. And you know, sometimes quick and easy doesn't always equate with accuracy. So that's the kind of practices students are bringing into the classroom today. And I think everybody knows that a Google search is a lot easier than, in many cases, trying to make your way through your library's databases and so forth. So that balance between quick and easy and credibility is interesting. They also, in that same Pew study, they went on to say that students also say that the information is overwhelming, and the teachers suggest that today's technologies make it really difficult for students to determine what's credible. So we have a lot of students doing a lot of kinds of Google searches and everyday research activity, but the teachers observe that the students have a hard time knowing how to separate credible information from not so much. So in this presentation, the focus is then how to harness these everyday research activities to teach more formal, critical kinds of research skills. And you know, my area of focus is technical communication, workplace, professional writing, but I think this applies in lots of other subject areas as well. But for today we'll focus on technical communication, professional and workplace writing, and some activities related to those classes. Excuse me, I'm going to clear my throat. Okay, so for workplace and technical writing classes, we typically require these kind of research projects listed here, and I think if you have one of the books with you, either Technical Communication 13th edition or the Strategies for Technical Communication in the Workplace 2nd edition, you'll see we have these kind of projects listed, and a lot of these projects require research of some sort, which is why both books and lots of books on writing have research chapters. And you know, some research is maybe more involved and more formal than others, but in general, this kind of workplace writing requires people to do research. So formal research, typically we would think in terms of primary and secondary sources. We would often, you know, in years past in particular, even now, we would send students to the library, and increasingly going to the library means going online. It doesn't always mean going, depending on the kind of library system you have. At least some initial searches can be done online. Typical formal research is asking people to rely on material that's been peer-reviewed and in some way there's some gatekeeping or editing involved, and that we often make our decisions on credibility based on the source of the information. So is it a researcher, a very well-known journalist, what venue is it published in, and so on, is how people generally determine what's credible for a formal research project. And this information is often very explicit. There are markers about the information source, the person's academic or journalistic credentials, the nature of the publication, and so forth. Everyday research, on the other hand, often begins with a Google search. And as I mentioned a minute ago, those teachers observed that speed is a really big factor with Google searching. It's quick. You get lots and lots of hits. But on the other hand, there's also this overload of information, which the teachers also commented on. And so you have also this kind of speed reading effect, where when you get that many hits, people are reading very, very, very quickly and making lots of quick decisions, often decisions they themselves can articulate. And I think we include ourselves in that category as to why you selected one link over another. And then, of course, depending on where you are or what kind of searches you've conducted in the past, Google and other search engines will filter and use algorithms to put certain findings at the top, and I think a lot of times students really aren't even aware of that, why certain items rise to the top of their searches. And then, of course, the interesting issue of breadcrumbs, which is that you find a source, and now instead of going back out to that initial search, you're just following one link. You're going kind of from one link to another, and you may be missing key information along the way. And of course, the other thing is that it's usually links within links are just reinforcing the initial idea, so you may not be encountering other ideas that challenge the research you've looked at, which could be like library research. On the other hand, those of us who remember, spending time in the stacks know that when you were looking for a particular book, you'd often see another one on the shelf and take it down, and it might offer more a balance that way. So that's a contrast between formal research and everyday research. Not to say there isn't some overlap, of course, but I think the speed issue and the overload of information is a big one. Excuse me for a minute. Okay, I'm back. So this issue helped me think about an activity that kind of came to me one day as I was getting ready for an advanced tech comm class, an activity I've come to call everyday research. And so what I do for this activity is I come to class on a day we're going to talk about research in technical and professional communication with a few examples, and that's easy, and I think anyone listening to this could do the same thing. Just think about the past 48 hours, something you researched online. And then I'll ask students, once they've seen my examples, to come up with a few others as well. It didn't take me long that particular morning I was thinking about this to come up with some examples. So I'll show you a few of the examples that I have brought to class in the past, and then we can talk a little bit about some student activities and ways to start to get students to think about how their search activities and their kind of very quick decision making about what constituted credible information becomes a way then to think about more formal kinds of research. So here's a typical activity. Now this, depending on the age group you're teaching, this may reflect more the instructor's demographic than the students, but it's probably not an atypical kind of search someone would do. You're trying to lower your cholesterol. You hear about this margarine that has plant stanol in it, and so you go to the store and you buy some of it, and then you think you want to do a little more research. So that's an activity that you can actually sort of demonstrate in class. You Google it, and you can start off just by talking about what your search terms were. Whether you search on the name of the margarine or on the more scientific terms, and then you can narrow down on what people find and how to look at secondary sources and how to find actual scientific studies about this based on what you find online. And then, of course, from that material you can move to finding some of those articles at your college or university library or online if they're available. So that's just kind of one example that requires students to think about some scientific publications. Same theme here. I guess this must have been a week I was probably having my cholesterol checked, I guess, but you're trying to keep your whole family healthier, so you want to cut back on saturated fat in the diet, and you discover that these coconut macaroons there in your pantry have a lot of saturated fat. And it's from coconut. Well, you thought coconut was healthy, so what's going on there? So this becomes another kind of everyday activity where you get online and start researching saturated fat generally, and then coconut in particular, and whether this is a good fat or not a good fat. And in having students do these activities in class, it's very interesting because you can put students in groups of 2 or 3, and you can have students doing the very same activity across different groups, and they all find very different things and have very different reasoning for why they took the research path they did and what they decided was credible. So here's another one, and this is I just have these 3 examples, and then we can talk about some of the questions that that are useful in class on this. So you're doing the laundry, and all of a sudden you discover that your dryer isn't working. Everything's cold and wet in the dryer. You can't call anybody to fix it, so like many of us, you go online to see if you can fix it yourself. And I think this is another one that has been interesting in class to see what students do and what they decide is useful. You know, do you just click on the first link? Do you look at the domain name? There's a lot interesting for technical communication too, this particular example, because so many user manuals now are online in PDF form, and you know, who can find the manual to your dryer that you bought 10 years ago, but this also becomes an interesting activity for finding user documentation online as well. So sometimes you can do kind of a 2-for-1 activity in some of these too. So the little preamble I have to these to this activity in class is what you see at the top here in quotes. We do research every day. It can be stuff at work or things related to home, and then we start talking about slowing down a little bit and thinking critically about this process, and then from there we move into a discussion then about more formal research and how you can use your online search as a start. I should say some libraries now are really changing the online interface to the library, particularly just acknowledging the Google generation and trying to make things a little bit easier. So, excuse me, once people have narrowed things down online, often then the library becomes a really great place to take what you found and look for some more formal or peer-reviewed material. Although, you know, increasingly a lot of that's available online too, like the Public Library of Science, so you don't always have to go somewhere else, but a lot of times you do. So here's some of the questions from that have been generated in the past from that activity. Just a real drill down on why people clicked on or valued the information on one website over another. You know, it's interesting, some of the research on this shows that design plays a huge factor in what people find as credible, just the look and feel of the site, which is not surprising in one way, but kind of is in another. How to work with Wikipedia. I think we're sort of past the age where instructors say don't use Wikipedia. We generally say don't use it as a source, but it's not a bad starting point, and how to find the how to look and see when it's been most recently updated, and then how to use the footnotes as potential starting points for the kind of journals or other publications you might use. Did you compare different sources? Did you even look at the source of the information itself? And then another interesting activity is to really focus on what features on that website made people stick around and really look at the page, and how quickly people evaluate and what they look at to make a decision. So in Technical Communication, the 13th edition, on these pages 135 through 36, we've got some nice guidelines for researching, conducting research on the internet, and those might be something you want to look at, but they have a lot of these kind of guidelines laid out about limited search results, using appropriate keywords, how to work with Wikipedia, how to drill down a little more and look at the domain name, the purpose and sponsor of a site, look beyond style, and there's a number of other ideas there as well that are useful. So author's credentials and so on. Then that becomes a nice opportunity to use those guidelines and lay those on top of the activity that was done in class. I mentioned this a minute ago, but I think it's really interesting to work with our classes on this topic, because it's such an age of visual literacy, visual communication, visual media. It's the age of learning on the screen, and a lot of the research really shows that people, their first impression is huge, and that's based on look and feel, not often on some of these other credential factors. So, and then you can have a nice discussion about, you know, how someone can make a beautiful website, but it's completely fake. On pages 153 through 154 of Technical Communication 13th edition, we've got, I'm sorry this is a little blurry, but we've got then this nice flow chart or decision tree, I guess, on how to then use critical thinking skills about the information you found online based on these 4 questions, and then how to apply those findings to the material you're going to look for now for more formal research. So you start with what you find online, you cultivate some questions and ask those questions to see if the sources seem dependable, and then you can use those sources as a springboard to other information that might be more credible or more traditional research for a formal project. You know, keeping in mind that the distinction between everyday and formal is not the distinction between digital and print. I mean, that sort of used to be how people thought about these things. It's obviously not true anymore. You can have online material that's peer-reviewed and highly credible, so it's really not about electronic versus print anymore. But these questions then become useful to think about how to apply these to the research generally, and how to take those activities that got you started and move those into another setting so that you can work on finding some more formal, more peer-reviewed information. So I've got 2 more slides left. There's one on just some other activities that we've got a kind of a fun activity in on page 151 on digital and social media, where we have students use Wikipedia as a starting point, take a big topic like global warming, and then have them trace out those footnotes and use those footnotes to evaluate some of the works that's been cited and possibly some other sources that they could consult. I mean, it's very hard for undergraduates to figure out what peer-reviewed journal in climatology they might want to look at, but they might find some journal names in footnotes that they could use. We've also got an interesting activity at the end of Chapter 8 on page 172 on assumptions that people make, and then how to think about these assumptions when you look at some websites for information. And in strategies for in strategies for technical communication in the workplace, we've got also a similar kind of activity on page 50. So these are all nice ways to take that classroom activity I just talked about and then push that to get students to think about that a little more before they get into some of their bigger research projects. The final thing you can do that's a lot of fun is actually have your students amend the guidelines with the ideas you came up with in class discussions, because they are very technically savvy and they're going to think about things we didn't, and so you could use a wiki to collect students' ideas for guidelines for everyday and formal research. So just to sum up, obviously people are doing research all the time, and our students continue to be part of a generation after generation after generation that's just very used to just checking things on their phone and looking things up. So it's kind of second nature for them, but the critical thinking and evaluation maybe isn't as much, and applying that to workplace, academic, and other kinds of writing they're going to do in college and in their careers becomes a really nice way to start with something they know and move into some new points, so and some broader points as well. So that concludes my my presentation. Thank you very much for putting up with my scratchy throat today, and for attending the webinar. I'll look forward to some questions.
Thanks, Laura. And your voice was not scratchy, so don't worry about it.
Oh, good. Thank you.
We have a question. No, you sounded great. We have a question from Brenna Dugan. She's wondering if you have any examples of some websites that are beautiful / professional but fake. And I thought that was a really interesting aspect of the presentation too. And you may not have any pulled up.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything to show right now. But, you know, it's a question of what's fake, too. I mean, is it totally fake, or is it just really, really a bias toward one perspective? I mean, really, really fake stuff tends to be like these spam and other phishing emails that you get that then try to send you somewhere to reveal your bank account or that kind of thing. And a lot of those don't actually send you to websites. You know, I think if you take a topic that is considered controversial by some, like climate change, it's pretty easy to find websites that may not be totally fake, but may really lack balance, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I was trying to find a website that I remember using in a class around an assignment like this. It was about, it appeared to be like from the CDC or, you know, or some other like World Health kind of organization, and it was all about the risks associated with vaccinations. And it really, do you remember this? It really took a lot of digging to find that it wasn't actually an official site, that it was a privately held site. I'm not seeing it show up in my Google results now, although, you know, maybe through my search habits, I've screened out the opportunity to look at beautiful fake websites somehow. Google's protecting
yeah,
me.
that could be. I think, you know, every time I teach a class like this, we look for new examples because everything's changing so much. I mean, there have been a lot of examples around science, you know, scientific topics like vaccines, like climate change. Those are some good examples. I know there's also the really, really egregious, you know, off the charts ones about certain events in history that, you know, didn't happen. I mean, these kind of things. So, you know, and those are maybe easier to spot than some of the ones like the one you just mentioned, which probably, you know, uses a logo from somewhere and has somebody with a PhD on the page. And so I think every year the topics change, and it's not that hard to just think about what's controversial this year and go ahead and find something.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, those things are always shifting because they are so often a reaction to some kind of controversy in the public arena. So there is a website that Elizabeth Nicias, one of our attendees, just contributed, and we can probably pull that up, or maybe Jean-Pierre, maybe you could click on it and take control back and show it. There.
I just think it is. I'll be able to see it. Let me see if I.
You will if. Let's see. It's just it's www.d as in dog, h as in Harry, m as in Mary, o.org.
Could you say that again?
Sure. It's www.d as in dog, h as in home, m as in Mary, o.org. And then there's a /facts, FACTS.html. There we go.
Oh, I see. It looks like Jean-Pierre might have that.
Oh, there we go.
Here. Yeah, okay. So I can quit. Yeah, this is an interesting page. First of all, the design of it is horrible. So, and you know, the thing is that as much as I was saying don't use design as the people shouldn't let design skew them, it is true that professional organizations usually pay a lot of attention to the design. So
that's true.
You know, on the other hand, a design like this is sort of, a lot of people would click right out of this because it's so ugly. I mean,
that's true.
Read it necessarily, you know, because it sort of looks like a 1980s, 1990s kind of web page. But for people who are already convinced to some extent that whatever is here is true, you know, they probably continue to keep reading.
That's right. Well, yeah, and it does offer, you know, these kind of assignments, of course, offer so much, you know, um, for students to respond to.
Mm-hmm.
We had another question about whether you do you assign students to do specifically print-based research, and if so, you know, what is the reaction to that? Do students have a harder time? Do they resist research that's not online? Or
Well, I don't see much distinction anymore between print and digital. I think that's not useful. I
yeah,
mean, a lot of the major libraries now, they can't afford to buy any more print material. They're running out of room. And big publishers, science publishers like Elsevier, for example, you know, are starting to publish only in electronic format.
yeah,
So, you know, I just don't think that's a very useful distinction anymore. It really has to be about source credibility. Some of the things that I showed in that decision tree, or those 4 questions, it's not really decision tree, but the org chart kind of
mm-hmm.
is, because take something like the Public Library of Science. I mean, that's, you know, highly credible. It has all kinds of good links to other topics around the same, other articles around the same topic, and that's, you know, that's online. Or
Mm-hmm.
at my university, a lot of the major research journals, you know, I only get the material online. Now it's a PDF copy, so it's sort of quasi-print, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not paper.
Right.
So I would never do that, because I think that for these students, it would make the college classroom feel like irrelevant in a certain way, because
Mm-hmm.
I think it's better to really talk about print versus digital as being like an early way of looking at this, but now, you know, that there's a big blur, and then helping them discover uh, what are some good criteria for finding credible material, regardless of how it's published.
Yeah, and it is that blur you're talking about that really makes it so important to cover issues of source credibility and criteria for evaluating credibility, more so even than 5 years ago, or, you know, goodness knows, much more so than, say, 10 years ago, when you could draw a pretty firm distinction between the validity of what was in print and the questionability of what they might find online. But as this is all sort of accelerated and we're seeing more, you know, digital natives, that distinction doesn't seem especially useful.
And more digital publication, I think, you
Right.
know, of the sort that was traditionally just print, for the reason that, you know, we're running out of room for storing
Right.
print material.
Yeah, that's true. So do you find that, I mean, do you have an opinion, and this, you know, might go beyond your comfort level with and expertise, but I was just kind of curious about whether you're seeing students coming in with stronger research skills as a result of, you know, just their kind of informal everyday research, and those skills just needing to be kind of refined now. Is that a difference than maybe 10 years ago? Or
Hmm. Well, I would say that it feels like students come in with a certain kind of curiosity
mm-hmm.
that I think is there because they can find things out, you know, I mean, easily. So
Right.
there's a kind of curiosity, and there's a kind of expectation that it's kind of the democratization of information, which is a little bit of a stretch, right? But that's what people in computer-mediated communication and
Right.
internet studies have called it. And so I think students come in, you know, curious, interested. They like this kind of activity in class. They really like talking about it. And you know, I think their research skills there still needs to be a lot of work, particularly if they're new to a research university or that kind of environment. But they already, you know, think about 10 years ago when we were still talking about Boolean searches, you know, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, all the chapters on research had something in there about that, because
That's right.
you had to really explain to people. And so I think, you know, now people are intuitively searching, and Google's filling things in, and that's where you have to talk to them more about that, you know, like uh, what it is that what it is you're searching on and how the algorithms are filling things in for you. So I think I would say there's a more innate sense of doing research, and then when you start talking about that everyday research and contrasting it with more formal work, I find students very, very engaged in that, more than they would have been on just a topic on, how to go to the library and do research. Sometimes we have the librarian who works with our department has also been really nice about either talking to students or doing a demonstration on how to use the library's online tools and wrapping that into the same week where we would do this topic. I think most students probably don't know much about the sophisticated ways they can use their own libraries.
Yeah, and I imagine that they, part of this shift that you're talking about, the idea that things are much more knowable or findable, like they don't have that, like it used to be that you would take students to the library for that orientation, and I was thinking about it when you were talking about the Boolean search, and that was always like a big part of the orientation, like that students were kind of starting at this kind of ground level, and the library orientation, I remember them sitting there just sort of looking bewildered, like this was all going to be so complicated, and then you took them to the stacks and you showed them the periodicals, and they expressed amazement over the fact they're like, oh, this is what volumes mean, oh, this is what, but it made it in some ways seem more insurmountable, even for all the effort that we were putting into making it seem like a doable task. And so it's a very different, it's kind of the way that uncertainty can be generated from too little information or from too much, but the nature of where that uncertainty is coming from is kind of directs what comes next in terms of how we present it. So it's interesting to think about libraries embracing their digital destiny and sharing with students some of those kind of higher level search functions. It actually makes me think I'd like to go talk to a librarian and just learn some of that myself again, because I'm sure there's a lot more.
Librarians are our friends.
It's true.
Our good friends, and the thing is, then when I get them into that library, the online library environment, and particularly when we're working with the librarian, well, now we can pick a journal. Maybe there's a journal they sort of zeroed in on as part of their Google type research, and now they can really look at some tools that are probably really different to doing a Google search. How to get into that journal, how to look for keywords, how to continue to trace out footnotes for other source information, and just something as simple as how to skim the table of contents of a journal for maybe the past 2 or 3 years and look at the abstracts and that Google environment. Now you're out of that Google environment.
Yeah, that's true.
So.
Right. Well, Laura, thank you so much for your time and for being with us, even feeling under the weather. I really appreciate your soldiering on with that.
It was my pleasure. It's always really nice, and thank you to everyone who joined in for the webinar today. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's always such a pleasure to talk with you, Laura, and you always give us so much to think about, so thank you again.
Thank you for inviting me, Amy. Okay.
All right.
Bye now.